Will you marry me? Oh, and by the way, agree to these terms. We're talking pre-nuptial agreements. Not the most romantic subject ahead of Valentine's Day, but can you see the irony? We'd like to welcome back David Hoffman, founder of the Hoffman Law Firm, who's here to help us better understand what it means to sign your name on the dotted line before you say, I do. Good to see you again, David.
Good to see you, and I certainly want to thank you for involving me on the topic of prenuptial agreements right at Valentine's Day. That's going to be awesome. I can't.
There's always too much of a good thing. There's such a thing as too much romance.
You're right. Yeah, let's just bring it down a notch.
Right,
we're
let's bring it
getting way
down.
too close. We're getting way too close. Let's just, let's just turn this another direction.
Exactly. Well, I appreciate you being such a good sport about it. First, let me just ask you this question right out of the gate. I certainly have known people to have signed a prenuptial agreement. Do you know anyone who's done so?
I think every once in a while you run across somebody who's gutsy enough to require a prenuptial agreement. I would say it's, my guesstimation would be it's probably not what everyone does.
And for people who are not familiar with what they are, can you just explain, just in simple terms, what a prenuptial agreement actually is?
Sure. It's it's kind of what it sounds like. It's an agreement that before the nuptials that two people get into. Assets take on a variety of forms. You can own a house before you get married. You could own cars before you're married. Typically, everybody comes to the table in a marriage, and they already have things. They might even have children from a prior relationship. And what a prenuptial agreement would do is, now most of the time premarital assets are already protected. If it's a premarital asset, typically that doesn't enter the marital estate. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that a prenuptial agreement can do is it can actually put in writing and actually clarify, okay, this is premarital and this is not going to become a part of the marital estate. Therefore, if the marriage ends by divorce, this house, just because we moved into my house after we got married, this house will remain my house, even though there's sweat equity or you may have paid a payment here and there, things like that. It protects things. It protects non-marital assets from becoming a marital asset. You can opt out of alimony, or you can set alimony. You cannot opt out of child support or set child support because that is set by federal guidelines.
So there are certain things that are not allowable in a prenup agreement.
Right. I mean, right. You can't you can't set child support, as I mentioned, but you also it can't be out of duress. It's got to be fair to both people. Each person has to have their own lawyer from two separate law firms review and sign off on the prenuptial agreement. And so there are some safeguards with that.
Okay.
Both parties have to sign. If it's done right, it can be a good idea, but both parties have to sign saying, this is valid, this is reasonable, this is what I want. Mm-hmm. If I contest it at a later date, if I lose, I'm responsible for the legal fees, things like that to kind of protect, somebody from just being scorned or being upset and just fighting everything.
And it sounds like it also it alleviates the possibility of a lot of lawyer fees should you find yourself in a divorce, that you've kind of put the agreement out there. Everybody kind of knows what to expect when that inevitable day comes. And so you're not putting hand over fist out paying for, like you've said before, billable hours to an attorney to try to square up who's what's who's in the relationship.
Right, exactly. Now, I do want to point out that you're the one who said that inevitable result. That was you on Valentine's Day.
Although I feel like
I did not say that.
It's like it doesn't bode well for a long relationship. Like something's going to happen. Something's going to happen.
Yeah, well, that's probably for another day.
Yes.
Yeah, well, you can't walk up to somebody like 2 weeks after the invitations have gone out and say, here you go. You've got to sign this, or I know that we've already picked the caterer and the wedding invitations have gone out, but I'm not doing it unless you sign this. It can't be under duress. It's got to be fair and fair bargaining, and
and not if you want to keep all of your teeth. This is a perfect place. This is a perfect place to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about, when is the perfect time to propose such agreement. So why don't we do that in 2 minutes? We'll be right back. Welcome back. All you lovebirds, I'm glad you're watching because we are joined by David Hoffman, founder of the Hoffman Law Firm. And we've been talking about prenuptial agreements. And yeah, you say don't propose one under duress when the invitations have gone out, when you're 2 weeks away from walking down the aisle. What you do want to do is bring it up at the right time. But let me ask you, David, what is the right time?
When is the right time to bring up a prenuptial? That's, that's one of those questions, again, probably my best advice is don't bring it up 2 weeks after the invitations have gone out. Beyond that, I think it's something that probably needs to be a part of the discussion. I wouldn't recommend a first date. Start bringing it up there. I just don't think
that's just being presumptuous.
That's a little bit presumptuous, but it's kind of like, if you are going to get a prenup, if that's what you're going to do, if there are assets that a person has before they're getting married that they want to make sure are protected, or if they have children from a prior relationship that they want to make sure their inheritance stays intact, it's probably something to bring up. I would suggest, and this, of course, is not legal advice at this point, but I would probably suggest going into the bathroom, standing in front of the mirror, maybe scripting it out a little bit, work on your facial expressions, work on your delivery a little bit, and and hopefully it'll go well. It's usually not the most romantic conversation to have, but I think if done correctly, and if there are certain things in place, I think that need to be protected for both people. Sure. I think there's probably a way to do it. Just don't wait too long. Is
a prenuptial agreement a two-way road, though? So let's say that someone wants to propose that a prenup is required prior to getting married to another person. Can that other person say, you know what, I think that is a good idea, but I have some terms as well that I want agreed to. So
absolutely.
Those be blended?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or there's two separate agreements?
No. It would, it would be if there are terms that you want to add to the prenuptial agreement. Nobody owns the copyright, if you will, on a prenuptial agreement. If let's say you and I were getting married, Leyla, and there were things that you wanted to protect, and there were things that I wanted to protect. Well, we would sit down and we would come up with a combination of protecting both of us, and and we would go from there. But of course, ours wouldn't end in divorce, Leyla. Of course not.
Well, what I find really interesting, so the way prenups have worked in the past, you typically think if someone has property, stocks, bonds, cash in the bank, all those things. But things are changing with millennials who are engaging in prenups. I read a really interesting article a day or so ago, just that millennials are engaging in prenups for other reasons, including pets, embryo ownership, student loan debt. So is this a way to protect people also from being liable for someone's debt?
I think really anything can be on the table. Okay. As long as it doesn't violate public policy, I think anything should be on the table.
One last question I do have for you, and that is something that you don't hear very often, but a post-nuptial agreement. I didn't even really know that those existed.
Well, what you can't do is try to have somebody sign a prenup after the nup, right?
Yeah, right.
So a prenup is something very distinct, and that has to be prenuptial. A postnuptial contract, it'd probably be better if I gave an example. It'd be something like, let's say you're apart, but you want to reconcile. And the reason you're apart is because of something unfortunate, like your spouse is an alcoholic or a drug addict or chronic adulterer or something along those lines. What you can do is you would put together a divorce agreement that, would probably favor, the person who's not at fault. And then you would add conditions, like if you don't finish rehab, if you keep cheating on me, if you miss an AA meeting, some kind of condition that once violated, it reverts back to you're going to grant me a fault-based divorce. You're going to pay me alimony. You're going to split the assets as follows. That's an example of a post post-nuptial agreement, and that would be, it's like almost, that's actually called like a reconciliation agreement.
I see. Okay. And with just a couple of
that's
seconds left, okay, with just a couple of seconds left, David, when following laws for these agreements, does it matter where you're married versus where you're divorcing? Should those agreements then come into effect?
They're based on state law. It's going to be the state law that governs. It's not a federal thing, but if you own property out of the country, you might need an international prenuptial agreement.
Okay.
What's going to govern is the law of the state where you're getting divorced, where the assets are, where the divorce is happening.
Okay, that answers my question in this little nugget of time that we had left. David, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate you having me.
And happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day to you as well.
We're back after this.